Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Outer Space Outcast. I'm your host, Madeline Grace, and on this week's episode, we welcome Miss Jennifer Stein of the Sedona MUFON, who I have had the pleasure of working with the past couple,
A year.
A year. Gosh, that's so crazy. Thank you for the opportunities that you seem to have given me at this time. I'm very grateful.
Well, Grace, it's such a pleasure. It really is. I'm so honored and blessed by you showing up and having sincere interest in the subject and being such a great person at the door, meeting and greeting people. I'm really very grateful.
Well, I am very honored to even be in the same space as you and the people that you have introduced me to. It's been quite a blessing for me, honestly. So I do want to start talking about MUFON, kind of what MUFON is and how you got your start in it.
Okay.
You know?
I'm happy to tell you. MUFON has a preamble that most MUFON representatives will tell you. It's basically the scientific exploration of the UFO phenomenon for the benefit of humanity. And it started in 1969, right at the same time when the Blue Book project closed, which was run by J. Allen Hynek, of course, from Northwestern University. He took it over in the 50s, the very late 52, 53, and he ran it up until 1969. And then when he left, he started his own research organization called CUFOS, which was the Center for UFO Research, because at that point, Hynek had been convinced it's a real phenomenon. So when the official Blue Book project closed, where people could report their reportings to the government, MUFON kind of stepped up and picked up the ball at that point, because we knew it was going to have to be a civilian research initiative to really get to the bottom of a lot of these sightings that didn't make sense. With the Blue Book projects, about 30% of them went unexplained, or they were really sort of considered to be UFOs. So what MUFON says it does is it looks for what's called IFOs, which means identified flying objects rather than unidentified flying objects. So they train field investigators to seek to know how to identify certain aerial phenomenon, know what different clouds look like, know what different aircraft look like at night, know what different satellites look like. There's a large field investigating training book that field investigators go through, and MUFON has undertaken this to kind of apply science where they can to identify craft, and when they've gone through all of the potential known things that it could be that someone has seen or encountered or whatever, then they can eliminate it as a known craft, and then they can officially, designate a sighting as an unknown. And they tend to keep very good, accurate records, it goes into what's called a CMS system, which is a reporting system for events, for contact that people have or sightings that they have. And this reporting system then will triangulate multiple sightings. So if multiple people in a particular area have a sighting, say it's the city of Phoenix and it's a sighting that comes in from the north, there may be 4 or 5 people in the north that see it, and then as it moves over the city, then it's spotted in the south and it's coming from the same triangulation. When you have multiple witnesses like that in a CMS report that don't even know each other, that kind of creates some validation or collaboration of data. And that's essentially what MUFON tries to do. And then MUFON has this subtle underwing that I am participating in, and that is to benefit humanity. It means to educate humanity. So there is different chapters in different cities have regular educational programming where they invite people in to hear a speaker and then to ask the speaker questions and to begin to become educated on the subject in a way with personal contact that you might not otherwise do. So I started hosting programs at the public library in Philadelphia, where I lived, in my local community in Radnor. I started that in 2002, hosting regular programs, and I've been doing it for practically 22 years now. And when I moved to Arizona, sort of unexpectedly in 2022, Stacy Wright from the Phoenix MUFON group knew me from the MUFON symposiums I had done and she had been involved in. She asked me if I'd be willing to do the same sort of thing I had done in Philadelphia here in Sedona, because Sedona really is a hot spot for UFO sightings, UFO events, people interested in the subject, and people doing expanded consciousness work in a variety of ways. And it would be a good place to have a regular MUFON group and to educate the public about what MUFON does. So I started in 2023 hosting regular programs, and now it's, July of 2024.
Wow.
So it's been a year and a half since I've been doing programs up here.
For some reason I thought it was longer, but I guess I knew you were in MUFON. I guess I just thought you were in Sedona a little longer. It's crazy,
I started
what
in
you
February.
have done and how it has impacted the community in that short amount of time.
Sure, we have about 400 people now on our mailing list, and we've had some major events here with some major speakers, which has been really great. And this weekend we did a film festival screening for the aerial phenomenon with Randall Nickerson. So it's really a pleasure to host Randall. I've known him from the East for many years. And as a co-filmmaker, of course, we've known each other as filmmakers. It's really an honor to be here and to host him.
Wow.
And I think the crowd was really affected by the film.
I think so too. Yeah. And I was moved. Jeez. And it's funny because I saw it when it first came out, but then watching it again, it brings up more stuff, and not to mention you're surrounded by fellow experiencers who also are touched by it. So everybody in the room, whether it's this lecture or this film or another lecture, to be in that same space with people to share that information and with people that are all open-minded, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yes. I'll just add a comment here that having a UFO experience is mind-changing and emotionally changing, and it's something that shifts you. And that's well captured in Randall's film. And what's also well captured is people don't really want to talk about the experience because they don't know how to, because of the ridicule factor still being a significant phenomenon. The culture has been well indoctrinated to ridicule and criticize people who claim to have seen something or experienced something that doesn't fit the standard model. And once you have that experience, you can't put everything back in a neat little Pandora's box that you had it before.
No.
It just, reality changes. And for some people, that's emotionally very difficult. And so to do the work that I do with MUFON, it gives permission for people to speak and share in a community that's going to be respectful of them and not criticize them, not disrespect them, not tease them. And it's kind of like a quiet, respectful club.
It is.
Sort of like Alcoholics Anonymous, or, people who have been gay and finally come out of the closet about it. It's a topic that's somewhat difficult. You could also make the comparison to women who experience rape. They don't want to discuss it. It's a traumatic experience. It changes their lives. They will never ever be the same after an experience like that. But to have a community of other people where it's safe to let your hair down a little bit, it's very compassionate. And that was the goal that I had in bringing community together for lectures, because we all go out after the lecture, for either a dinner or a drink or an appetizer, where we can just be a little more relaxed and have some private conversations and some group conversations. But it creates a sense of community where people feel they can let their hair down a little bit.
Yeah. It's very beautiful what you've created, and I've been able to, even going to these dinners and the people that I've met and that I still keep in touch with, and I've just made all these connections from this, and I have followers who see my videos that I post on MUFON, and they'll reach out to me and say, oh, I live in Wisconsin, how can I get started with my MUFON? How can I do what you're doing in Sedona here? And of course maybe other chapters are different, and it's like you said, Sedona is a hot spot for this phenomena, and not everywhere is going to be as, how can I say?
Receptive.
Yes, yeah. So especially in a place like Wisconsin, where you have people that want this, that want to have these conversations, and that want this type of group and this community, but it's just, baby steps.
Sometimes it takes a couple of brave people to just start it. When I wanted to join a MUFON group in Philadelphia, I found out there was not an active one. Mm-hmm. And a friend of mine named Ruben Uriarte, who is the state director for Northern California, he had traveled with me in the crop circles in England, and he said, Jen, there isn't an active group, but you could start one. And I went, I don't want to start one. I just want to join one. And there really wasn't an option. And I thought, well, how hard could it be? I just started asking myself these questions. Like, how hard could it be to bring in a couple speakers? Like, let's see, I'll put 2-3 months together and see if I can run it. And just do one a month and make it easy. And so I kept it as simple and easy as possible. I would bring people in, and if I didn't have the budget to put them up in a hotel, which often I didn't, because I did all my programs for free for 20 years before I got to Sedona. Now I have to charge because I can't get the library for $20-$30. I have to rent a facility for a couple $100 each time. So I just charge $15 at the door. That usually covers my expenses, my gas to drive up here and whatnot. And a lot of speakers are willing to come in and present. I pay them a small honorarium. And those that live locally can drive home, and those that can't, well, we figure out a way.
You always do. Yeah. I think that's very cool. And just where this can help, as I have in my notes here to discuss the disclosure movement, which is very prominent in our history right now. And I really think MUFON has a huge part to play in that. And maybe it always has, right?
Yes.
Because how long has MUFON been around?
Well, since 1969. So how many years that is, I think it's 50. Mm-hmm. We've passed the 50-year mark. And really what MUFON is doing is kind of twofold. Not only are we reaching out, we're investigating the UFO subject, which is really, sometimes we think, the government's job, but they've kind of put it back on us as a civilian research group, which is fine. Many of the people involved in MUFON come into MUFON because they have training. They're ex-military, they're police, they've been in some kind of secret service in some way or another, and they know what's going on. They know what can't be talked about. They know what can be talked about. They're curious. They want answers to what happened to them. They want to meet other people that are doing the same thing. And we also think that MUFON reports what the government wants to know, what's being seen, because our records can be tapped into, most likely in these days with AI. We kind of confirm publicly for the government what people are seeing. So if the government wants to know what people are seeing, they do. It's just kind of the way the cookie crumbles. So it kind of provides a multitude of services for people. And it's also a place where people can feel not so crazy because they have a sighting and they want to know if anyone else has a sighting. And if they report their sighting, we can give them that information and say, yes, other people did report your sighting. We can't tell you who they are, but the same thing you reported was tracked in 5 different locations at the same time and place. So you're not so crazy, and you did see it.
That's so cool.
So
and how validating
it provides
for people.
a service for people.
Yeah.
An important service for people. And that's why I got involved. I had a sighting myself, and I knew how I felt crazy for about 25 years until I knew someone else saw the same thing I did. And I was shocked enough to realize that it was not a figment of my imagination and it wasn't a dream. And that gave me sort of like the inner permission to say, okay, well, maybe you want to explore this a little bit so you can answer some of your deep inner questions. Because the UFO subject is really tied to many deep, deep philosophical questions that humanity has to ask themselves while they're alive. Who are we? Why are we here? Is there a higher, more intelligent source than us? Are we the only intelligent source in the universe? If we're not, who else is around? What are they doing? Are we important to them? Are they important to us? What's our place in the bigger galaxy? I mean, it's so much bigger picture question that it's profound enough that it can really change people's lives when they begin to unravel the puzzle.
Yeah. It's a very, what's the phrase, down the rabbit hole?
Yes, it is.
And that could be a
Yes, it is.
scary leap to take, you know.
For a lot of people, emotionally, it's too scary for them, especially if they've had an unpleasant encounter or an abduction encounter of any sort, or multiple members of their family have. It's a terrifying, terrifying topic. And so the more we can begin to educate people into the whole variety of contact that's happening, I think the easier humanity is going to be trying to wrap their brain around what is now well known. People like Carl Nell, very, very high up in the military, coming out clearly and saying there's no doubt, the military has no doubt that these are interacting with us. It's a real phenomenon, and it is something that needs to be exposed to the public, but it needs to be exposed in pieces that they can logically digest and understand.
Mm-hmm.
And they can understand why the secrecy, they can understand why the debunking. It's probably a social strategy exercise in calming and protecting dysfunction or disruption through the larger society. But eventually we are going to have to digest this subject.
Yeah.
And it's a big precipice for humanity. It's the next frontier of expanded consciousness and awareness.
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to ask you how old you were when your first contact happened.
My first sighting that I remember clearly was 19. I was 19 years old. It was September of 1975. And I had a sighting at about 5:30 in the morning outside my parents' house that didn't make any sense at all. And it was a rectangle of white light, and basically my encounter with it was less than 500 feet away. It was about 90 feet long and about 6 feet high, and it was undulating, brilliant white light that I thought would blind me, and yet it didn't light anything up in my bedroom or the meadow or the big tree that it sat above in the meadow of my parents' property in Pennsylvania. I grew up in an area called Lansdale, or the town was Copesville. It's about an hour north of the city of Philadelphia in the direction towards Allentown, but not quite all the way up to Allentown. So we were in the middle of Mennonite farmland, and it was not light out yet. It was basically 5:30 in the morning, so it was dawn. It was getting light, but it wasn't quite light. And that was when the first experience I remember happened. But I had some unusual experiences when I was young. Like, I remember floating around my neighborhood, seeing houses from above, and seeing my house from above at night. And you wonder how that's possible. I also remember once staring in a neighbor's window up high, like at their house sat 4 or 5 steps up from the ground. So you had to walk up a flight of steps, and I was looking in their dining room window. So the only way I could be in their dining room window is to be on a ladder or to be above a bush that was right below their dining room window that was higher than me. I was like maybe 6 or 7 years old, maybe 8 years old. So I knew I couldn't be looking in the window, but I saw my neighbor's father. The neighbor had a child my age that we used to play with. Her name was Christine, and I find myself looking in the window at her father, my neighbor, named Mr. Boltz, who was a fireman, and he had a big blanket over his dining room table, and he had laid out all these guns, like rifles and different size guns, handguns, shotguns, and he was cleaning them. Maybe he had 4 or 5 different guns and pistols laid out, and I thought, my goodness, I didn't know he had guns. And I'm standing there staring at him, watching him, fascinated. And then I look at myself. I'm trying to figure out how I can be looking in the window. And I start looking down below me. And I see the bush below me. I don't see my body. And I wonder, how can I be here? And at that moment I said, gee, if I can see him, can he see me? And at that moment he turned, he looked at me, he got up, he walked right over to the window, stared right at me, and flipped the blinds closed so I couldn't see in any longer. And that was really weird, because I thought, oh my gosh, he can see me. Maybe I'm in trouble. What am I doing outside my house at night, So all these questions were like going through my mind, and then I don't remember much, except that a couple of days later, my parents had a squirrel in our barn that we had that was creating a ruckus. Whether it was a squirrel or maybe it was a groundhog or something, and my father said, I need to shoot this thing. Who do we know that has guns around here? And little sweet Jennifer popped up and said, Mr. Boltz has guns.
Oh my gosh.
And then they said, well, how do you know that? And I couldn't really answer them. And I got a spanking because it was assumed that I got into the gun locker while I was playing with his daughter. And we knew where it was and how to get into it, which is not true at all. We never did. We played in the basement where they were locked up. We used to ride our bikes around in her basement, but I never got into the gun locker. But Christina and I weren't allowed to play with each other for about a month, and I got a big spanking because it was assumed that I got into the gun locker. Because I said, oh, he's got a rifle. He has a couple of handguns and a rifle. So how did I know that? I knew it psychically. Somehow I had consciously been out of my body and seen that. So I had a lot of bizarre experiences as a child. I had the ability to know things and see things that I shouldn't really have known. And I don't really know if that's connected to the ET phenomenon or not, or if I've just had easy out-of-body experience. It might have come from a near-death experience when I was 6 months old. I almost died as a baby. They told my parents I probably would. I had severe diarrhea, and I was in the hospital strapped down with needles in my arms, and they said, we don't think she's going to make it. So maybe I went in and out a couple times, and I got used to going in and out of my body. I don't know. But I've always grown up with sort of a heightened sixth sense awareness. And it's not like I go in and out of body willy-nilly when I want. That's not really the case. But there are times when I know I need to access information, and it's amazing to me how that information ends up coming to me. And many times it's very intuitively. And I think, gosh, I'm very grateful for it, and then I look for verification for it. But it's, sometimes it's scary.
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, I bet.
Because I don't quite understand the whole process.
Mm-hmm.
But
it's understandable.
But I trust it. When I get an intuition that says, go in the garage and get your speaker out, or get this cable out before you go to this lecture, or bring this extra piece of paper, or bring this extra piece of equipment, even though you don't think it's redundant and you don't need it, bring it. And then I end up needing it.
Wow.
So I've learned to listen.
Okay. That's a powerful message for everybody, I think, too.
Mm-hmm.
But when he closed the blinds, what do you think he saw? Or he just sensed something that he was being watched?
I think he sensed he was being watched.
Ooh.
Because he
Wow.
never said
Wow.
to my parents, yes, I saw her by my
floating above
floating above my dining room window looking at me. But he sensed that when I had the question, it somehow triggered his awareness of me. Even though he couldn't see me, I think, yeah.
But then that makes me think, too, about how many people feel spirits, and
yes,
and they're probably, which I think around us more than we realize.
Oh, sure. But there's a ghost in a house and it shows up. People know they're being watched by a ghost or something.
Yeah.
Their sixth sense goes up and they're like, ooh, my hair's standing up. What's happening?
That's wild. That is a crazy experience.
It is crazy.
Oh my gosh.
It is crazy. I only remember it because I got a spanking.
Oh my.
And I was like, well, wasn't very fair to me. I was like, I couldn't explain.
You don't understand.
Yeah, I couldn't explain to my parents how I knew he had guns, and I said, oh, I think I saw them once. I think he had them out and he was cleaning them. So they called my parents called him and said, well, have you ever cleaned your guns in front of your children? He said, no. My wife and my children do not know what I own, do not know what I possess. I keep it locked up. He was a fireman.
So
he really
strange.
was strict with his guns, and he was very Christian, very spiritual. They were Mennonite. He said, nobody knows I have guns. Wow. He said, Jennifer must have gotten into the closet. So I was older than his daughter. So it was assumed that I was the mischievous one. And I opened the locker and showed her or something.
Oh my gosh.
But I didn't even know where it was in the basement.
Well, it's crazy, though, how that experience you're able to, tie it into, as unfortunate, as it was.
I learned to keep my mouth shut when I was little. Don't tell people.
They don't get it.
Spanked.
Oh,
Right?
that's too bad though.
I know. It's okay.
But now you get to, we can share your story.
Yeah, I got to understand that the world was bigger than we understood, and we couldn't always really be totally honest about things because people couldn't handle it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I learned that at a very young age. So I guess that's made me compassionate for other people.
Okay. So everything has its place, then, right?
Yeah, there was an early compassion lesson.
Well, but aside from those experiences, as you got older, did your experiences get more? Did you, or your knowing just kept developing? Your that sixth sense, you were developing it more as you got older.
Yes, lots of stuff happened around 2021. So after this UFO encounter, where I saw this big white light, it seemed that the psychic abilities just expanded exponentially, and it was a little more than I could handle. I was going back and forth to a yoga ashram at that time. It was called the Kripala Ashram, and it was in Sumney Town, Pennsylvania. And I would go there for a week or weekends at a time, and I would have accommodations and stay over and go through everything that the participants who lived at the ashram were doing. So we get up at 4:30 in the morning and take a group jog to do breathing exercises. Then we would do sitting breathing exercises through one or the other nostril as the sun came up. Then we would go back and practice yoga. That was usually like a type of Ashtanga or Iyengar type yoga, which is pretty demanding on the physical body, so that you get your body as ship-shape as you can. Then you can quiet the mind, and you can transcend the mind because the body isn't holding you back. You don't have back issues or knee issues or breathing issues or heart issues or whatever. You learn to take care of the body and to slow the aging process so that you can have a long, healthy, enlightened life. And after postures, we would do something called satsang, which was kind of singing, dancing, chanting, like you might think, people were doing in airports years ago, and when people would run into the Moonies or other groups, they would be like, doing things like satsang, singing in joy with the guru. And then we would do I forget what they called it, but it was like question and answer period of time where you get to sit with the guru. He'd sit up on stage and he would answer questions about consciousness or about health or wellness or about breathing or about transcendence or about how to quiet the mind or how to calm the emotions or whatever was going on, and then how to develop your telepathy and how to develop your consciousness. So a lot of that was going on at the ashram, and there were a couple of times where I had a question in my mind. I remember one about the pineal gland, and is that connected with psychic awareness in the body? And if something happens, to you, is it that pineal gland that's getting information? And he looked right at me. He picked the question right up out of my mind, and he said, "Okay, today's satsang, that's what we're going to have, is on the subject of the pineal gland." And he looked right at me and smiled and said, "It's a good question from the audience, but nobody had asked it. It was just in my mind." And here he went about answering how if you have experiences that open your consciousness before puberty, before you grow this calcium sheath in your head that grows over your pineal gland, what happens is you've awakened that gland and you've opened that channel, so you keep it open and you keep it flowing, and the calcium sheath becomes thinner or more transparent or less blocking to your ability to develop your psychic awareness. Mm-hmm. And he said it's very important to be aware of this because it can save your life at times, and it can bring you greater and greater enlightenment. So if you learn how to work with your pineal gland at a young age, and most of us were in our 20s. I was 19, 20 at the time, but there were many people in their 30s, 40s, and 50s who also lived there. So he was guiding us as to how to stay in touch with, develop, control, and use your conscious expanded awareness and develop telepathy. And he practiced it with people on the ashram. There were many times when he would it would be silent day, and he would whisper something in my ear, and he would be 200 feet away from me, and I could hear him clear as day in my ear, and I'd turn around, and he'd be looking right at me, and then he'd nod. Or he'd pick his finger up and he'd put it up to his head and like kind of say, I bow to the divine within you. Yes, you just heard me. Yes, I just sent you that message. So, you know, to people who had some awareness, he deliberately communicated with you. And that was a little weird for me. That was a little overwhelming. And that's one of the decisions that I decided I wasn't going to move on to the ashram because I couldn't quite handle it all at that point. And I kind of just said to the universe, I need to dial this back just a little bit so I can learn to live with this in a constructive way, and so it doesn't make me crazy or bipolar or manic or arrogant or whatever. I needed to kind of just have more control over it. So I just said, let's just dial this back just a little bit. I'm going to go to college. I'm going to study science. I'm going to be grounded. And I'll come back to my consciousness studies when I'm able to handle it.
That shows a lot of strength, though. I mean, for you to recognize that within
Yes.
yourself, that's pretty powerful,
Yes.
too.
Well, I also had a powerful experience with my father when he died. My father died. He had emphysema most of the years of my growing up, from the time I was 13 till the time I was 20. He died just a month before I turned 21. And he came to me when he was dying and communicated with me beyond a shadow of a doubt. I'm totally clear because I had confirmation of what he told me. And he had already died. He died in the hospital and asked me to come be with him. And when I got there, I said, okay, Dad, I'm here. What is it you wanted to tell me? But he was already gone. He was warm. His body was warm, but I, closed his eyes, took his tongue out of the back of his mouth where he had gagged and choked, and made his body look more normal so that when my mother saw him, she wouldn't be too freaked out. And then I just sat down quietly with him and said, okay, Dad, I'm here. I put my head on his solar plexus and wham, like he was right there in my ear telling me all this stuff. And so I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that life, the consciousness survives death. That we can go in and out of our bodies. Shortly after that, I had my own out-of-body experience as well. And I just began to put pieces of the unknown puzzle together for myself with personal experience. Because when you have a personal experience, like with a UFO encounter or something, it profoundly shifts you, and you know something beyond a shadow of a doubt that no one can tell you differently about. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't matter what it is. If it's a skill like skiing or using a drill saw or, learning how to edit or film, or just having a loving experience with someone, or having a psychic download or intuition, whatever it is, once you have the experience of it in your body, like a healing, if you've been severely ill and then you were healed, mm-hmm. it changes you forever, and you just can't go back and pretend that didn't happen anymore. What is in your own Pandora's box is different. Well, I think a lot of people need to hear these sorts of things right now, because as Definitely. We go through a major consciousness shift on this planet, people need to realize that their own experiences are very valid, and that if they can learn to listen to themselves and their intuition and trust it and then work with it, they'll develop a self-confidence in themselves that the mainstream world would like to take away from them, and make them feel they're not in control of everything, and mm-hmm. they're dependent on other people. But really, we can be dependent on ourselves quite a bit. And we can help ourselves, soothe ourselves, comfort one another, and understand things that maybe we think we're not capable of understanding, mm-hmm. even though they're difficult.
Yeah.
And you don't have to know all the answers. Like when I first had my UFO experience, and when I was 19, it stayed in my gray box for 25 years. I couldn't negate it, but I couldn't completely understand it either. So it stayed in my gray box for 25 years until someone else said to me what happened when we had that experience. And then I knew by them writing their story down and me writing my story down and us sharing our stories that we had basically the same experience. Okay. And then I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt it was real. And that's when I got involved in starting a MUFON group in Pennsylvania, because there wasn't one. and I started bringing in speakers so I could learn from them faster than I could going out and buying their book. And I'm dyslexic, so when I tend to read, I'll reverse things in my mind, and sometimes if I don't understand something, I'll tend to go to sleep too quickly if I'm reading. And so to bring in a speaker, have them do a PowerPoint, present about their book, it gave me a fast, quick introduction to their work. Then if I wanted to go back and spend the disciplined time to learn their details in more detail, I could, but they also got to reach a broader community, sell their book, communicate their ideas, and educate my community as well. So as I was getting an education, I was taking a lot of people with me at the same time.
Wow. Would you say that is you feel that is a part of your mission here on this planet?
I think it is. I didn't commit to fully thinking I could do that. I wasn't sure I could. But after I did it 3 or 4 times, I was like, well, this isn't that hard. And if I plan ahead, it's easy. And so the trick was just start learning how to plan 6 months to a year in advance. Then it's easier to bring in people, have them speak, and you meet people, you go to conferences, you meet people, you find out they don't live that far, they're willing to drive over, they have a good PowerPoint, or they can communicate their message pretty well, so you network with them, you email back and forth, you develop a bit of a friendship, you bring them in. Sometimes if I need to, just to help with economics, I host them overnight if I have a guest room, and then bring them to the lecture the next day, and then treat them to dinner with a group of people just to say thank you. And it really helps build a sense of respect and community, not only between me and that author or that filmmaker, but also through the broader community that gets to come.
Yeah, it really is a special thing to share a meal. And my thing is food. I love food, making food for others,
breaking bread together, drinking wine together.
Such a beautiful thing. And to do that after such a profound meeting, like talking about whether it's life beyond death or the UFO phenomena, whatever it may be, that is this otherworldly phenomena, these experiences, to sit together and share a meal, that has been one of the coolest parts, I think, about even working with you guys this past year. Just being able to experience that and to just sit in that with these people. And I mean, last night, we were all sharing our phone numbers, and
that's right.
One of the just for our listeners and viewers, there was a man at the meeting last night who wanted to start a UFO
talk group.
Yes. And he was so passionate about it. And he was like, well, when can we do this? I want to get a group together, And everybody else at the table was like, oh, yes. I want to do that. Yes.
Right.
And I'm like, man, this is how we do it. This is community.
And I think I said, well, Dennis, pull out your phone and start getting other people's numbers. Because I'm away till October, but there's no reason why you guys can't meet all summer and do some stuff.
So I think I might try to maybe organize a CE5 or something where we can go to a coffee shop and just sit down for an hour or two, And just talk and be in each other's presence and talk about otherworldly things that are maybe hard to talk about, but when you are with other people who are open-minded, it becomes quite easy. Yes. And I think people that obviously haven't been around that before have that experience.
That's right.
They're like, oh, I feel safe here to talk about this. And then watching the barriers in people's minds,
drop.
Yes. How beautiful is that? And they're probably completely changed. I mean, life is work and change is just a part of who we are, but that switch flips and it's I'm safe to talk about this and I'm safe to explore this. And from my experience, I was never the same, so.
You'll hear the same thing when you speak with teachers who say, once I taught them, how to add or how to read, their lives were forever changed. So I, as a teacher, was helping them open their minds so they could then teach themselves. And that's a great gift. And I think that's what this community does too. It provides the opportunity for people to have confidence to study on their own, to learn on their own. to explore on their own, to make connections on their own, and to ask questions. It's okay it's really okay to be skeptical. It's okay to ask these deeper questions, and it's okay to, find other people who are struggling with the same questions.
Mm-hmm. And then they take that, they go home and share it with their family, they share it with their friends, and it's like, I just picture these little pings off of people,
Yes.
and then you have this happening on a global scale.
It's like pollination.
Yes.
It's like
yes.
bees and pollinating the flowers.
I love that.
It promotes the growth of greater beauty and understanding.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think that is incredibly powerful. Wow. Yeah, I'll use that one again.
Mm-hmm.
And earlier we were talking about, sound.
And frequencies.
Yes. We went on a little walk to Peace Park earlier, and talking about how important sound is at, especially this point, I think, in our human evolution, and where it's guiding us. Talking about the pyramids and how we thought, they moved the rocks, and just going into sound a little bit. And I remembered you mentioning a couple or years ago that you were a part of a
musical roadshow group.
Yes.
Yes. It was called Up with People.
Up with People.
Up with People. And it grew out of the Kent State murders that happened in Ohio State and Kent State University in the 60s, in 1968. It was a group of students who came together, and we were funded by a wealthy businessman who allowed us to write and produce songs, and we put together a show about human ingenuity, about peace, about how we have to reach out beyond our cultural and religious understandings and share with one another, with music as that international medium, because music breaks down barriers. So it was a wonderful opportunity to spend your first year of college on the road, traveling through other countries, singing in other languages, staying with people in their homes, literally breaking down those barriers. And it was during a time in 1973 when we were having a gas crisis and Richard Nixon was being impeached. So many of the American students were kind of flipping out, saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe what's happening in our country." And the Spanish students who had experienced fascism said, "Chill out. If this sort of thing happened in Spain, we'd have a major coup going on and people would be being shot in the street. You're dealing with it with your judicial system. He's going to be impeached. It's fine. He did something wrong. You'll move on. You'll get a new president. Just chill." So it was really an interesting perspective. We also had Native American students who traveled with us, and so music is certainly a powerful tool. It's certainly used in massage, and it's used in meditation, and it's used in prayer to help lower our stress levels, help get us in a right mind frame or frequency to start to expand our consciousness and relax enough to, listen to our inner guidance and our inner gifts. And I think we're just on the precipice of beginning to understand the real importance of frequency, because frequency is definitely connected to a heart resonance that we have. We put out an emotional field from not only our mind, like an electrical field, from our mind and from our heart. Mm-hmm. In fact, our mind and our heart have a yoke between them. So our heart has a little mind over top of it, which is why I think people who go through great shock can actually die of a heart attack, because the mind over top of their heart can't quite handle what has happened. And the mind directs the heart, if it can't handle what has happened, to stop beating. So as we begin to learn about frequency and open ourselves to it, we're making discoveries that there's certain hertz and frequencies that cancer can't survive in, that Alzheimer's can't can't function in. So by literally listening and being bombarded by certain wave hertz frequencies, you can eradicate these illnesses. That and different light colors and different fragrances and different herbs. I mean, we're learning so much that tends to get hidden, tends to not really come out in the mainstream, but it's very profound.
Yeah, the importance of music at this time. And there's definitely science, I think, is catching up with that too. Slowly but surely.
Yes.
Or maybe it always has in its own way, but now it's not so woo-woo. It's more like, oh, this is fact. We could back it up.
Yes, they're learning that certain brainwave frequencies are conducive to different states of mind, and that healing can occur in certain brain state waves as well. One of the people I really love his work in this field is Greg Braden.
Mm-hmm.
He's done some profound work in this area that I think will really open doors. But I've always been fascinated by the work of Hans Jenning, who was this Norwegian or Dutch scientist who put talcum powders and sand and various materials on top of large drums that he then burst sound waves through. And he then photographed with cameras directly above them the various patterns that these different types of powders, talcum powder or sand or water, would create these permanent ripple patterns. If it was something like sand, they would move into these amazing geometries that mimic what we see in the crop circles, that mimic what we see in DNA. And inside a flower, if you look inside the front of a sunflower, you can see this miraculous pattern that looks like a flower of life pattern, or a sacred geometric spiral, from smaller to larger. Often, what the small is mimicked in the larger aspect, like nature is, probably like the universe or the galaxy is. So it's amazing to me to look at some of those frequencies and hear the sound and look at the geometry and realize as the pitch goes higher, the geometry gets more complex. And as the pitch gets lower, the geometry gets more thick and solid and more simplistic in its geometric form. So there's so much we have yet to learn. I mean, even having structured water and frequencies in our water is extremely important, and even that science is just now beginning to emerge.
What a fun time to be on the planet,
Yes.
And thank you for paving this path for so many of us to, like myself, I can now walk, like you walk, or what is the phrase? You walked so I could run, or something. And I'm very grateful for that. I've learned so much from you since I've started, and I'm very incredibly grateful to you. And I know this is just the beginning. This is so exciting, where we can go from here. Whether it's with MUFON, it's just, and earlier we were talking about the disclosure movement too. Like, things are shifting
Quickly.
And when a big event happens, people are going to turn their attention to people in the community, because they're going to realize they can't trust the government, right? Because
they're not going to get the right answer from
them. So they're going to look for people within the community like themselves, who have experienced this themselves, who are knowledgeable in this topic, and they're going to turn to you and to Randall Nickerson, to all these other people who are familiar with this.
And to you, Grace Hayes, as well. Because they're going to be looking for people that where it's comfortable to talk about this, where they can trust they're going to get some information, at least information that is honest and truthful. At least I believe what I'm sharing is honest and truthful. If there's wool being pulled over my eyes, I'm easily, happily willing to admit that and say, I used to think this, but now I realize I was misled. So yes, there needs to be a community that people can go to. Yeah. And you're absolutely right. As events continue to happen, because the UFOs never got the memo that they didn't exist. Right? There's been lots of memos that have been put out by various people in the government and the Robertson panel and the Trick memo and the Condon report. There's lots of people who have said, no, it's not a phenomenon, doesn't exist, and we don't need to pay any attention to it. In fact, that was well captured last night in the film.
Yes.
About the Ariel phenomenon, because even someone as prominent as John Mack was almost discredited, almost asked to leave Harvard, where he had tenure as a professor and part of the medical school, and all of his credentials were called into question because the medical school didn't like the fact that he was discussing this very difficult issue and topic, and he was bringing it up in the mainstream. So you're absolutely right. When each one of us finds the courage to at least own our own experience, honor it, and then start to have compassion for ourselves, then we can begin to have that for others.
Yeah.
But it's only through personal experience that that can happen.
And I know, as hard of a topic as it is, teaching people to not play the same game that they're playing and to fight with compassion and with love.
Yes.
And that's kind of the secret to winning.
Yes.
Yes. Recognizing that it's not an us against them or a them against us or good against evil. It's just things are this way and we're evolving, and it's kind of up to us to really take these next steps. But to truly evolve, we must move through love, and
Yes.
we can't play on their level. So, well, we could, but where's that going to get us?
Right. Right.
So.
If you have to take your level of integrity down to play dirty with someone, it's no fun. And when you get to a certain point in your life, you choose the type of people you want to interact with, because you want to keep things on a respectful level, on a calm level, and there's no need to be disrespectful or nasty. You can state your truth, and it doesn't have to be disrespectful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I have a feeling some people, as this information continues to come out, and eventually it will reach a point where, like we said earlier, you won't be able to deny it. It's going to be so in your face and so obvious, you're going to say, oh crap, we are not alone. Right. There is other life in this universe. And I feel that people may feel anger at first, whether it's the anger of being lied to, misled, but then, like what you said earlier, and it has to be done in this way, because if it happened maybe even 10 years ago, it would have caused mass chaos and pandemonium, and it wouldn't have the correct effect.
Right.
So it's like when we give breadcrumbs to the collective, and maybe that is what the government is doing with disclosure, and whether they have their own agenda or not, either way, truth always comes out eventually.
Yes.
That's
they
just
even dug up Lincoln to find out that he was also poisoned on top of being shot. The truth always comes out.
Oh my gosh!
Yes.
Well, I didn't even know that.
Yes.
Okay.
I think they exhumed him.
Oh my gosh.
10 years ago or 12 years ago in research to find out if that rumor was true, and I think they found out it was.
Wow.
So while he was being nursed, he was given arsenic.
Wow.
Yeah. It's crazy.
That's wild. I know, I just never knew that. But
so the truth does come
yes.
out. It's going to come out eventually, and it would be a lot easier if it came out more gently and in a timely fashion. I wonder what the world would have been like if we actually didn't cover up the Roswell incident.
Ooh.
No. I mean, there were incidents before that, too. There was the famous 1941 shootout that occurred with a large UFO over top of our Navy ships in Long Beach. It was major what had happened. I mean, the military got called out. There was a gunfight that lasted over an hour. And bullets were bouncing off this craft that was sitting right above Long Beach Harbor, where all our military ships were. This was in 1941. Wow. Was that something to wake us up or make us think maybe we shouldn't go into the war, or was that a warning? Or, I wonder. I wonder what that was all about.
Everything's got its place, though.
Everything does. The young Bill Tompkins actually saw that whole thing from the balcony of his parents' house right above Long Beach, and he never forgot it. But that's one of those stories that's buried. A lot of people don't hear about it. They're like, "What? The battle over L.A. is what it was called in the Los Angeles Times, and many other newspapers carried it. It was front page news. I mean, the UFO subject really used to be front page news.
Yeah.
For a number of years it was, until Roswell and toward that heavy-duty debunking started. Between 47 and 52 is when they kind of created the protocol of debunking, and the CIA was formed, and the Army was separated into the Army and the Air Force.
Blue Book? Was that the time of Blue Book?
Blue Book came into existence in 1952, but before that, there had been projects like Sign, Project Grudge, Project Starlight, and something they called Project Blue Book that was run by Edward Ruppelt, and it was an internal research group that happened within the military. So Captain Ed Ruppelt would go out and talk to generals and other Army people and Navy people and say, look, yes, this is what we encountered, this is what happened, and we're investigating it, this is what we experienced, this is what we think is going on. So there were a number of encounters that we were researching and crash retrievals we had done. But then the government decided that within the military, they were no longer going to research this openly. And they started to debunk the subject within the military. They downgraded Edward Ruppelt's position, told him he wasn't allowed to talk to anybody with a higher clearance than he had. And then they took the whole project away, and they gave it to J. Allen Hynek, who had been a consultant for Project Blue Book. They had brought in academic people, and they thought that they could control J. Allen Hynek and because he was an atmospheric physicist, they thought they could make him come up with scientific explanations to hide the reality of what was happening. And that's really what the official Blue Book project was. But after 20 years of taking reports from people, they realized that people wanted answers back. And they finally just decided they were going to close Blue Book and say there were no cases of any significance. And that's what they did. And people didn't believe it. They had the Condon report to really put a lid on it. And they hired Edward Condon, who was, I don't know if he was the dean of University of Colorado or he was in some scientific department, but he was also a military guy as well. And he basically put the final squash on the whole UFO subject. But what happened later is there had been a very famous memo that was discovered that he had written to Twining, or Twining had written to him, I think. Twining, I think, was a general at that point. And it was a memo that said, our goal is to completely, debunk and put this subject to rest for good. So your conclusions have to be that there's absolutely nothing to this whole UFO phenomenon. And that's what the Condon report's conclusion was. But that was 2 years before they did their investigations and their reports. They had already been decided what the conclusion would be.
Wow.
And there was an agreement to write back and forth to one another and share and review the verbal assessment of the conclusion. So when you go back and you look at these historic documents, you understand why we're at the state we are today. Because we've been burying the subject for practically 50 years now. And how do you bury a subject like this for 50, 60, 70 years, and then all of a sudden expect that you're going to have a congressional hearing and everybody's going to say, oh yeah, it's a real phenomenon and we've actually been studying it for a long time, but we just didn't tell you. Well, the public isn't going to trust the government or the military after that.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to then do a 70-year catch-up education on a subject like this that has so many bizarre factors, time slippage, in and out of reality. Something appears here, then it appears over there, then it appears back where it was, and you can't even trust what you're seeing because it's so bizarre. Lights that are so bright they're going to blind you, but they don't light anything else up. just weird aspects to this phenomenon that really have to be unpacked piece by piece. And I think our government is been denying their own research, not figuring it out, and they're in a panic themselves. I don't think the public is in that much panic, but I think the government and the military is in a much greater panic.
Because the people are about to see, and the people are about to know.
That's right. That's right. And so many of them see and know already. Major polls show a number of different things, that the UFO subject is one of the most highly researched things on the internet. I think the only thing that's a little higher than UFOs is porn. Not a pretty comparison, but
it says a lot.
But it says a lot. Like, okay, all right, this is the second most highly researched thing. And then when you do polls about how many people believe that we are not alone in the universe and that we are being visited, the numbers are over 50% of people that already accept this as a reality.
Wow.
Right? And now that there's been congressional hearings on the subject, that number, I'm sure, is even greater. So, and just the pure number of sightings. Within MUFON alone, we get close to over 10,000 sightings a year between America and, say North America, Canada and the United States. And most of Canada's population is on the border of the northern border of the United States, right? So between those two countries, on average, it's about 10,000 a year. So you add that up over 10 years, you've got 100,000 sightings, and that's just the U.S. Then look at the land masses that are around the rest of the world, and then those people that are out on ships and whatnot. And since less than 10% of sightings actually get reported, you could multiply those numbers by 10. So if there's 10,000 a year, that means, well, really there's 100,000 a year. So then when you go 10 years, you're looking at 1 million just in North America alone, right? Then expand that out to the rest of the world. The sightings are unbelievable. The sightings are very significant as well. Things like the Chinese airports have been shut down 5 major times with UFOs over top of the airports. Like, what's that about? O'Hare had a major sighting.
That one's close to home.
Many airports in South America have had sightings. Military sightings are off the charts. We only know about the 2005 Roosevelt incident, I think, off the coast of California. 2004 was the Roosevelt, and we know about the Nimitz and things like that off the coast of Florida. But wow, this, huge engagements are going on all the time.
Are they preparing us for something?
Good question. Good question.
I guess we'll see.
Yes.
Time will tell.
Right. There are predictions we'll have some major sighting in 2025. So.
Which, to me, that is just, like, even when I was in college and I was taking my rock and my soil science classes, and when we would learn about the other planets and just our solar system in general, to my professors, it was just obvious to them that there was life out there, because this, like, they study it, they know this information. They, the same elements that make life possible for us on our planet could be the same on another planet, just with different elements and different, so it was kind of like a no-brainer. It's like, why are we even questioning this? Like, think bigger, people,
Think bigger. That's right.
So
most stars that are seen with our telescopes today have small rocky planets around them. More likely they have planets than not. So that just increases the likelihood that life could have developed in other places long before it developed here. We're very arrogant in our conceptual idea that we're the most intelligent species in the galaxy. So yeah, we're up for some big shifts. That's right.
But I think it's it's a part of our evolution. It's a part of, as a species, the walk and the path that we must take. And we can only just do the best that we can, be the best that we can be, move through love, move through compassion, have an open mind, have an open heart, and be willing to ask hard questions and be willing to receive the answers that come with the hard questions.
Bingo. Yeah.
And that's the
That's
key.
the hard part. That's the hard part. That's right.
But I think we're headed in the right direction, and I'm excited to see where MUFON goes with this, and if I can be a part of it, I would love that opportunity.
Well, you already are, Grace, in a very, very special way.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for bringing your generation along.
Yeah, that definitely feels like that's a key, it's, granted we all work together, but the story of what will I leave behind for my children and my children's children, and truly now at this point in time is when we really have to honor that and prepare for future generations. And if that means, well, one, that means taking care of our earth that sustains us and making sure we don't destroy ourselves in the process. But that also means preparing for perhaps contact with beings from outside who, and maybe like we've seen in ancient civilizations where this has happened. Like, this is nothing new. Right. Even the documentary talks about it, right? Mm-hmm. These beings that come down, these star people that interact with these civilizations and help them evolve, and then they say, all right, you're good. We'll see you in a couple thousand years. Right. And then they leave.
Yes, many indigenous cultures, including in Zimbabwe, where the Ariel phenomenon was shot, there seems to be an ancient World Heritage site where tribal elders from Zimbabwe have been buried for a couple hundred years, and apparently there have been more than one sighting there already in the past. That might have been why the craft landed with the Zimbabwe school children. It might have been part of that whole bigger story that goes back there many, many generations.
And see, we've got to start looking at how all of this fits together, how we are all connected on a global level. It's not a matter of race, religion, what your beliefs are. It's a matter of, this is our history. This is this is in our DNA. This is who we are as a species. We must look beyond these dividers and recognize that there is something much bigger than us at play here. Did you have anything else you would like to add?
No, but I'm happy to do a show with you sometime about the Travis Walton story.
I would love that. Travis really, he helped me in many, many ways, and that was and I would like to have him on too. That would be very cool.
Yes. We're going to we're planning now for next year, which will be the 50th anniversary of his event, November 5th. So we're going to do a number of different screenings and Q&As, and maybe we'll have a little mini conference up in Sedona. Up in Snowflake. We'll do a conference the weekend of the 31st and the 1st. On November 5th here in Sedona, we're going to do a screening.
This year?
Next year.
Oh, next year.
Next year, which will be the 50th. We'll do a screening here on the 5th. We'll do a screening in Phoenix on the 8th of the Travis Walton documentary called Travis, The True Story of Travis Walton. And we'll have Q&A, and we actually just lost a crew member who was on the original logging crew. John Goulet just passed away this past week. So we're very sad to have lost John. But also very grateful that we had his participation in the film. I think he really added a very unique piece, a very grounded piece from his experience, because he was in the military himself, and he knew how to identify craft and things like that. So that'll be a wonderful thing to kind of help promote for next year.
Okay. And where can people watch The True Story of Travis Walton?
Well, right now they can watch it on YouTube.
Okay.
It used to be up on Amazon Prime, but it's been shadow banned from Amazon Prime.
Of course.
There's a message that pops up now when you Google it to watch it that, yes, it was on, but it has been banned because of information that's considered to be untrue or something. And remember I said there was all that debunking that went on the last 2 years?
That's right, yeah.
So because of that debunking, they've taken the film off.
Okay, well, there's still places where you can watch it, though, so that's good.
Yep. You can buy it. You can go to TravisWaltonTheMovie.com and learn about the film and see a lot of outtakes and things like that there for free as well.
All right.
Yeah.
Well, it is up to us to actively seek the answers to our questions. And it is a gift to be able to do that. And so let us honor this adventure we're on and just keep chugging away at it. It's gonna be interesting. So stay tuned for other episodes with Miss Jennifer here. And thank you so much for being here today.
It's my really great honor.
Aw.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course. We'll have you on again soon. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Outer Space Outcast. Until next time.